Hey, so Tara Boothby, Lisa Rowbottom, and we are going to talk about predators. So not like in the wild, not wild animals, but actual like people who are predatory of other people. And it's a real common thing that we talk about with our clients. But it's always sort of surprising for people when we start talking about a predator. Like when you first find out that a person has been predatory, is that how you say it?
Predatory, yeah, or
You say it better than me.
Radiating.
Something like that. You know what we mean. But when somebody is sort of victimizing us or you, it's always surprising when somebody first really makes it come alive for you. So what do you think, Lisa? Like, what are some of the things that you notice with clients when they first start to be awoken to what's been going on for them?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I first start to notice is kind of a gradual realization of what's been happening. So it's very rare that someone walks into the office and says, oh, I think I have a predator in my life. Rarely maybe, but usually they come in thinking that they're the one with the problem. So they'll say, my partner or my whoever sent me in because they say I'm too anxious or I'm too emotionally expressive or impulsive or whatever. So they will come in thinking they're the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then quite often as they start talking to me about things and telling me what's going on, I think just in the act of actually talking through to someone what's happening, you kind of start seeing them go like, wait a minute, but that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's your experience.
No, I think that too. Like lots of times people come in, or they've made a big mistake. So one of the types of predators that I see is actually, I call it like a predator affair. So some people will have affairs for mutual beneficial reasons, but then there's a class of affairs where somebody chooses somebody and woos them in a way, and it grooms them. And it's over the 17 years I've been at Sojourn, I've come into account with this type of victim multiple times. Mm-hmm. And it's quite powerful to really see the progression of how the predator has groomed and conned and really gotten this person to the place where when maybe sex happens or whatever happens, money is taken, whatever has happened that the predator is up to, that by that point the person, it's like the consent isn't even an option, but a person will come in and they're like, well, I didn't say no. And a lot of times I will notice something to the effect of, at that point, I don't even know if you had a choice anymore. Mm-hmm. So in the book, there's a great book on abusive men. It's geared towards men who are abusers, but it's not just men abuse people. That's another thing that's important to note. Yeah. Why does he do that? It's an excellent book. One of the things that they notice with abusers is that they might seem chaotic, but there's always a method to the madness. There's always something they're getting towards, whether that's sex or money or some type of exploitation.
Mm-hmm. Or even just possession.
But it can look chaotic.
Oh yeah.
I would say often it does.
Yeah, well, and I think if it were actually methodical, some people may catch on. To be honest, if there was like a very set way that people did this, you'd be able to say, okay, this is what you look out for when somebody's being a predator. And most of the time, people come in and they don't even realize that things had changed to end up where they were at. They just react as if, well, this was just the person that I picked and they've always been this way. When in reality, it's a gradual shift and a gradual change, a gradual manipulation. It's insidious. Nobody walks out and says, oh, I think I'm going to date him, he's a predator, or date her, she's a predator.
Yeah.
And I think the gender piece is really interesting. Mm-hmm. I think my guess is primarily when we think of, say, abuse or somebody being a predator, we think of more physical stuff. We're like, physical abuse, sexual abuse, that sort of thing. And, when you look at the statistics, in those areas, men are primarily, but not always, the person who commits the act. But when we're looking at, say, financial abuse or emotional abuse or psychological abuse, we don't often recognize those as quickly.
Yeah.
Even as, let's say, a friend or a family member, you get a feeling something's going on, but there's no bruises. There's nothing to say, oh, this is,
Yeah, I think so. The gender, predators. There's no gender particularity. Maybe some attachment styles might be more inclined to one type of abusing than another, or it's just like abuse is always about power. So whatever power might have been used against the predator, or whatever things that they sort of value or see as strengths inside of them, or insecurities. So it, again, different flavors of what a predator is or what the method behind it is. And I think it's really like what you say too, Lisa. There's no how-to. There's no even the DSM might break down some different categories of personality concerns that would attribute to some predatory behavior. However, there's people come in here, we don't just, you sit on the couch and we know what's going on for you with mental health diagnosis. It takes a while for us to see what's going on with people. But if you're in a relationship with a predator, it's a slow con, is one way of viewing it. And so, again, what Lisa said, you're not looking at somebody and they're like, boy, this person doesn't want me to have any friends, and they want to control my bank account, and they make me do things sexually that I don't know if I want to do, or they don't ask me, they just do. And so all of a sudden, after a while, the boundaries are so eroded, and people really, in a predatory relationship, the victim starts to believe that they're part of it. We are the same. It's like a flavor of codependency or flavor of enmeshment.
Yeah, I would say so. I think just because oftentimes, even when a victim realizes they're with someone who's a predator, generally their first response is to try and take responsibility on themselves for, how did I let this happen, or how did I get here, this is my fault, and they kind of take it on themselves as if to say, well, I should have known better, or I should have seen this coming, or I allowed this to happen. And in reality, I mean, a good manipulation, a good con, you don't know what's happening.
No.
And when you're so far in that there's really no way out, by the time you realize what's happening, or they've convinced you there's no way out, then you're going to feel stuck and you're going to feel trapped. And unless somebody says, okay, first of all, what's happening is wrong.
Yeah.
And secondly, you can get out, let us help you, let me help you. It's, at the beginning, I think, hard to believe.
Yeah, and the research and the old research that I know of, there's probably newer, better stuff, I just don't know one right now, is it takes the average abuse victim 7 times to leave. And how I normalize that is, in the cycle of abuse, after the violence or the betrayal or the hardship comes the honeymoon. It's really hard to leave somebody when you're in the honeymoon phase. And a characteristic of a predator is frequently they're charming. They're lovely people. So after the blow up, whatever that might be, then there's this charmingness. So somebody who is verbally violent, which that is all types of people, all genders, all sexual identities of people. Verbal violence is frequent, and a predator can be only verbally violent. But these people can also be the most sweet, enduring, kind people as well. Yeah. And I'll let you go in a second. One more thing I want to say about the cycle from an addictions perspective. When we notice the cycle, that there's all this stuff that happens, the buildup of the cycle in the relationship. And after the violence comes the honeymoon, and then there's buildup again. But when a person's in this relationship, after a while, the cycle, it's like it gets so tight around the victim. And maybe that's another way of thinking, that sort of codependent enmeshment or be in a possession of the cycle. Those types of ways of thinking about why it's so hard to have vision.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that probably the most difficult thing for people who are on the outside witnessing something like this happening is to realize it's not as simple as, why don't you just leave? Often I see family members, friends get so frustrated with the whole cycle of abuse. And I mean, 7 times will be a lot of times you're moving that person out of that other person's house. And a lot of times friends, family members eventually get tired and just give up or walk away in frustration, which I can totally understand how a person would get there unless you understood that this is more than just this person agreeing to stay in a situation that's abusive because they just can't be bothered to leave.
Yeah.
So, that's one thing that I do tell family members quite often is, just don't walk away.
Yeah. And it's hard not to walk away if you've ever been supporting a family member, and it's hard not to be frustrated. And that's where, again, if we're supporting somebody who's a victim, it's good for us to have supports as well, whether that's counseling or other mental health supports. The other thing, so just the other marker of most predator relationships is also this gaslighting thing. And gaslighting is a hot topic, but when we're really noticing gaslighting, effective gaslighting, one of the main powers of a gaslighter is that it evokes confusion. And so a person who is in a victim position, it is confusing. So I have the most charming, loving person who buys me the most beautiful gifts or does these huge gestures, and then the gaslighting, the things that like the hurtful comments, or just the different things that are just trying to cause distress, the subtle power moves that build up to the larger, whatever that larger power move is actually going to be. And what I've said in the past, and I like this one, so it's nice to quote yourself every once in a while, right?
Absolutely.
Right? Is that an intoxicating environment is intoxicating, but a toxic environment is also intoxicating. And it is like a person in a victim position, it's like there's a drunk off of this. And I don't know if you can think of that in your room, but I've seen it with people where they're in the victim spot and they're drunk off of the toxicity of the abusive relationship. And as I can see people sobering up from that intoxication as they move away from the toxic. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And when you say confusion, I definitely see the confusion.
Yes.
A lot. One of the most common things I see is, people sit down and say, I think I'm going crazy. Yeah. Because usually when the person is in a very toxic relationship for long term, they're isolated. So basically the entirety of their life in some cases is that predator. And so they've been telling them consistently over and over that the world is the way they say the world is, and that usually includes a lot of gaslighting and, I wouldn't do this if you hadn't have done that, and you're the reason I hit you. If you hadn't made me mad, it's your fault.
Yeah.
That eventually they start to believe it, because if we're told something often enough and we don't hear the opposite, we eventually start to believe it. But something inside them says, but wait, I don't think this is how it's supposed to work. And so I see often kind of that back and forth between, well, it's my fault, but wait, maybe it isn't my fault, or this makes sense or doesn't make sense, and I don't even trust my own thinking anymore, because it's been so twisted and
I think that's good. And it's interesting, and I don't 100% know how to sort of voice this with clarity, but I'll throw it out there and see if you can make it better, Lisa. There's different stances in relationships and different ways that we reach out when our attachment system is activated. And I'll say that there's people who, when I'm in a state of dysregulation, I'll move into relationships, and then there's people who, when in a state of dysregulation, move out. predators seem to have an other focus when they're in their predatory position. So I see it, that they're looking at this other person as a possession, as somebody to have power over. There's a lot of that this blame, shame, blame, humiliation. Like it's a drive towards that person and a pulling of that person. And so it makes sense too that oftentimes the mover-outers, like in a predatory relationship, the victim is just like trying to keep the peace a lot of the times.
Yeah.
So that's where there can be that like agreeing or believing that we're similar, or I like this, or I can make this work. What do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it kind of runs along the idea that, when they look into how people commit to things, it's kind of similar to what keeps people in cults or in things that are unhealthy, is that the more I've committed to something, the more desperate I become for it to be the right thing or
Yes.
to make it work. And so not only have I got, in a case of a predator, this person telling me everything is my fault, I need to fix it, but I also have this internal drive that in some cases says, I've been married or in this relationship or with this person
Yes.
for years. What happens to me if I say right now, this was a mistake, and I walk away? I lose 10, 15 years of my life.
Yeah.
Innately, I don't want to do that, and so I start, trying to
Yeah.
fix it, trying to keep the peace. I just have to figure out the best thing to say or how to say it or what to do. I can still make this work. And, I think that's similar to
Yeah.
what you were saying, is that you're just...
Well, the peacekeepers usually try to fix. So then if the victim's role in the relationship starts to be the fixer or whatever, it makes sense too. It's like, this is what I've always done, is then I've like cleaned up the broken pieces, or I've modified, I've adapted. So it all makes sense. So you can feel chaotic, you can feel confused, you can feel like you're going crazy, you can really doubt yourself or doubt your good relationships because this is the relationship that you believe you have to save. That's all normal. And if you're confused about whether or not somebody is putting power over you, I'd say talk to somebody who actually, I would say this is one where you do want to talk to a mental health professional. You could talk to a safe friend, and hopefully they're going to tell you need to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. I wouldn't leave this to just my neighbor for coffee.
Yeah, or even calling the domestic
Yes.
abuse hotline.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a way to do that anonymously if it's just looking for information.
You can consult. We can consult with experts. If we're not sure, we can call the police or walk in and just say, "Hey, I'm not sure," and they're gonna advise us. We can look for hotlines no matter where you're at. A domestic violence hotline in Alberta, you can call 211. If there's these different resources that you can look into for your life, and Google a phone number and check it out, or even talk to your family doctor when you're in there.
Yeah. Family doctors are good.
Talk to your pastor. Hopefully pastors give good advice. Sometimes they think that they can deal with things in the church though, so sometimes churches aren't a good resource in these instances.
Yeah, they're often, once you have things underway, perhaps, to step back or separate from this relationship, and you're able to say, like, this is unhealthy, this is what I'm doing, they can be really good support. But it's good to perhaps speak to them and then someone else who's in the mental health field, just to get another perspective.
Yes. Yep. Awesome. Okay, and so just keep an eye out for yourself and for other people. I think it's good for us to be aware of unkindness and what is unloving and what is actually just violent, because it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And no one deserves to be hurt.
Nobody deserves to be hurt. No one deserves to be hurt. That's a really just simple and powerful way of saying it. Nobody deserves this. Yeah. Okay.
Anyhow, thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Oh,
There's the phone.
okay. Bye.